So first of all, I have to say that the Dutch situation is quite similar, not entirely similar, but quite similar to the German one, with the exception of this kind of very much now legalized third gender, this affirmative gender. But in the sense that it's like a step-by-step approach with fits and starts, that there's no master plan behind it, at least as far as I can detect. That's very much similar to the Dutch situation. A big difference is that the Netherlands doesn't have a constitutional court. Indeed, it's really difficult for courts to even assess something by the standards of the Constitution. So that's why the European Convention on Human Rights is much more important in the Netherlands than the Constitution, which is kind of odd. As for the TERFs or trans resistance, let's say in the Netherlands, it's again quite similar to Germany. There's nothing really much going on. It's much more a general resistance towards gender issues, including feminism, which is coming from the far right, which is really becoming bigger and bigger these days. We just had elections. About 1/3 of the seats in Parliament in the second chamber is left wing. And that's center to left, and there's nothing really radical there. Then we have 50, so 1/3 of middle ground parties, the ruling parties, basically. And then there's another third, which is right wing to really right wing. So it's quite worrying, to say the least. Anyway, I will give you a brief overview of the Dutch situation. So the Dutch legal framework, some of the phases, but it's really like a very, very general overview. And I will discuss some controversial issues plus recent developments. Most interestingly, this week, just 2 days ago, a new bill was sent to Parliament suggesting some changes to the Trans Act and proposing to make it also applicable to intersex people, which is something really new. And just 1 month ago, we had the Fifth Court granting a request for an alternative option of a gender marker on the birth certificate. So I will explain a bit more about that. So the Dutch legal framework regarding personal records, generally for people born in the Netherlands, the birth certificate is the basic thing for everything. So when a child is born, they are attributed the gender marker at birth, and that is registered on the birth certificate. The birth certificate details are fed into the personal records database, which is like the central database that informs everybody else, like the university, for example, our students, when they get diplomas, their data and also the verification of their legal identity is checked in the personal records database. And for foreign students, that means that when they arrive in the Netherlands for half a year or for a year, they just have to register, and their data are also included in the personal records database. And that includes also gender. So if there's someone from a country like Germany that allows for another gender marker, that other gender marker will be included in our database, provided they have official legal evidence of that gender. So organizations with an official public or social function, so not just government agencies, but any kind of organization can access the details in this database insofar as necessary for their work, and they have to ask for a government permit. However, information on gender, on legal gender, is not regarded as sensitive data, just as it is not in the European regulation. Only if someone, a trans person, can ask for their gender entry to be hidden or something, but then of course it becomes kind of suspected. So this information, together with the address and name, is provided automatically to anyone who needs data from this register. It informs then all other kinds of legal issues: the passports, health insurance, driver's license, so the university diplomas, etc., etc., etc. And so, if it doesn't match, your legal gender doesn't match your self-identified gender, and especially the way also other people see you, that's often experienced as administrative violence. So in the Netherlands, we have this two-track system. We have one set of rules for trans people and one set of rules for intersex people. And this now may change if change to some extent if the new bill is adopted. So the attribution at birth is just like everywhere else, male or female at birth. But there's an exception for intersex, well, let me first do trans individuals. They may change their marker as of their 16th birthday from female to male or from male to female. There's no other possibilities. What is required these days is an expert declaration, and for foreigners, 1 year, minimum of 1 year, lawful residence. So for refugees, for example, or undocumented migrants or stateless people, there may be some real problems there. It's the expert declaration that I will say something more about that later on. But that raised the discussion whether it should be, this requirement should be discontinued, raised the most turf concerns over the last year or so. It's an administrative procedure since 2014. Once one has this expert declaration, which is not a diagnosis of transgenderism or anything, it is a declaration by a medical expert. They have to be specifically authorized by the government. It's mostly psychologists. They're most often part of the medical gender teams in the hospitals. But the only thing the expert declaration says is that they have to be convinced that the applicant, so the trans person, is convinced that they want to change their gender. So this is quite complicated. They have to be convinced that the other person is convinced. That's all. And the main reason that is given in the Netherlands for this requirement is a bit different from Germany, I guess. It's to protect people who are actually not trans, but are, I don't know, mentally disturbed or something. So yeah, that's the issue. The second exception to the Dutch legal framework, that the binary framework with male and female, is for intersex individuals. Intersex babies may get we don't know. I will say a little bit more about that in a minute. We don't know marker on their birth certificate, and once they are a bit older, regardless of whether they have, we don't know, male or female, and it turns out that it has to be something else, then that may be corrected on the birth certificate, but on the basis of a diagnosis and always through the courts. So there's quite a difference also in the procedure. So how did this get about? Well, of course, there was Napoleon in the beginning who ordered all of this. And well, apart from the fact that during his times, many people declared that their newborn babies were girls because they didn't want to feed their babies to Napoleon's army. Other than that, it stayed quite peaceful until the 1960s, 70s, when there was quite some litigation, some people going to courts asking the courts to change their legal gender. And if reading the case law is quite difficult because or challenging maybe, because the terminology has changed so much over time that it's nearly impossible to understand whether those were intersex people or trans people, or generally speaking, the courts were kind of sympathetic and tried to accommodate wishes to change legal gender. So then what the government in the Netherlands tends to do is see what happens in case law, then they decide on a research project or establish a special committee that has to advise, and so they kind of drag along the procedure, the process, and at some point a new law will be adopted. So the first Trans Act was from 1985, and it was indeed based on recommendations of a committee of experts that I think already started its work in 1975, so very long time. This made it really possible to change from male to female or vice versa. The second Trans Act dates from 2014, and that was when we dropped this sterilization requirement and introduced the administrative procedure rather than the procedure through the courts. So after 2014, there were various developments again, because the new law that was adopted in 2014 already immediately at the time did not satisfy many politicians, and certainly not the many NGOs that lobbied this cause. So what the government promised was they would look into it, but please, let's adopt this law now. And so what they did was commission a research on male, female, and beyond, which questioned details about the current registration practices. More fundamentally, the conclusions also ask about whether it's possible to proceed without any registration. I did this research together with a colleague, and we were not asked to discuss the possibilities of having no registration, but of course we included it in our research. Then in 2017, there was an evaluation of 3 years of this new Trans Act from 2014. And this is what 4 years later now has led to this new bill. In 2020, there was another research into the financial and other practical aspects of introducing more than gender options, well, one or more gender options than male or female, what that would mean for the registration practices. Is it possible at all? What would it cost, etc., etc. So it's all very carefully, and well, I don't know carefully, but step by step cautious. So here's the new bill. The current act has this expert declaration to prevent light-hearted or mistaken changes of legal gender. Following up from the evaluation, it is now proposed to drop this expert declaration. And so even this proposal already some time ago elicited some turf comments in the daily newspapers saying, oh, well, exactly these bathroom comments. But the response from feminist groups denouncing this kind of view was much stronger. So I'm not so afraid for the turfs in the Netherlands for now. Instead of this expert declaration, what they are now going to do to prevent too many people, so people who might do it just for a joke or whatever, they make it in 2 steps. So first one goes to the registrar to announce the intention to change the legal gender, and then secondly, between 4 and 12 weeks later, one has to confirm their choice, and then it's all done. Secondly, the minimum age, according to the new bill, it will become possible for children younger than 16 to change their legal gender, but they have to go to court. This is one of the things that has already been criticized by the relevant NGOs. As to the permanency of the change, so currently with this expert declaration, they have to be convinced that you are convinced that you want to permanently change. They seem to kind of have let go of that idea of permanency. It's in the proposal, it's made possible to change 2 times, because it's still a binary system. It will be there and back, a return to the original state, let's say, which is possible through an administrative procedure, but someone who would like to change more often has to go to court. The moment one changes their gender at the registry office, one can also change their first names for free, which is kind of special because in the Netherlands it's really difficult to change names, even first names. So trans persons without the Dutch nationality, there will be no changes, other than at least nothing specific that wasn't there already. It's still 1 year, and they need to get their birth certificate from wherever their birth certificate is, which may be, of course, cumbersome. Another issue, the parental status of trans parents, especially the fact that trans men giving birth to a baby are labeled the mother of the child. That's really an issue, like in the UK too. But the bill says, no, we won't change that for arguable, I think problematic argumentation. They say it will affect many other people who really cherish their status as mother, and therefore we don't. I think that's really weak reasoning, because obviously one can think of a system in which people can choose, like in Australia, some states have this option, and and even if not, one could ask whether, this kind of general preference for something that's traditional should weigh heavier than the real problems of other people in current day society. But no changes are proposed. Then the different legal treatment of trans and intersex persons, this is important. The Trans Act, so there will not be a change. Again, there's no master plan, no big, huge gender act, but this new law will become applicable by analogy to intersex persons who want to change their legal status. And that's a good thing, because they now can just go to the registry rather than go through the courts, which is time and money consuming. The possibility of an X for which a a number of parliamentarians at least, and certainly also the NGOs are waiting. This is the same answer that the minister gave 2 years ago when he commented on the evaluation of the Trans Act. Say, well, we will wait for now and see what the developments in case law are. And those are developments primarily in the Netherlands, but to some extent also the European Court of Human Rights. This axis, since 2018, we have 5 different courts who have granted an X to people who asked for it. This is done on the basis of the article in the Civil Code that says if babies are of doubtful sex, we will register them as sex couldn't be determined. After 3 months, a final birth certificate is made up, and generally then they will have decided what it will be, and so it will just be male or female. But certainly in theory and according to the law, this might last forever. However, it happens very little, and this provision, which already existed since 1970, is very unknown in the Netherlands. So when in Germany in 2013 this was introduced, everybody said, oh, why? And why don't we have this? We actually do, and already since 1970, but it's not much used. Parents don't prefer not to most of the time. So what happened here is that the courts were confronted with people who said, could I please, please, please not be an M or an F? And then the only legal provision that came somewhat near to this situation was this provision for intersex babies. And so they applied them analogously, by analogy, to adults and said, okay, we are going to change your birth certificate and write down that it was impossible to decide on your gender or sex. So there have been 5 cases, one just last month in April. In all cases, the individual interests were considered to be more serious, so that they outweighed public interest in a strict application of the legal framework. In these cases, some applicants identified as intersex, some as trans, and some didn't really state anything about their identity at all, which is interesting because that seems to leave a lot of room for people to take this route. In the first 2 cases, a new birth certificate was ordered, but that is kind of very much a violation of the current legal system. The last 3 courts ordered a correction. So that means that the original sex remains visible, but only to in a few instances, because this will not be included in this personal database record database. So it's not visible for someone who hands out parking permits or something. Still many issues to be considered by the government. So now the government has said, let's wait and see what happens with these X's, and we want to know more. And yeah, well, of course, they have seen in Germany that if an X would not be enough, there might be a call for a positive, an affirmative marker. What should that be? And how could the whole system be changed? Because now, currently, the whole fight for this binary system to change is placed on the shoulders of those who ask for an X. That's just a handful of people. And that seems kind of unfair. But the government so far is not willing to take that up, unfortunately. So I will leave these elements for what they are as a kind of summing up. So what is the Netherlands doing apart from taking these steps and then standing still and then at some point saying, oh dear, we have dropped on these international scoreboards on trans-friendly nation. We need to do something. The government is trying to find answers and solutions in different ways. So on the one hand, there's the definitional expansion saying, well, men can be pregnant too. This is officially regulated since 2014 when the sterilization requirement was dropped. There is some categorical expansion for these intersex babies, but now through the courts also for adults. And at the same time, the government is also pushing for a campaign trying to convince all kinds of actors, both government agencies and non-governmental companies and other organizations, to try and decrease the collection and use of data on gender. That's it. Thank you very much.